Hare Krishna and welcome back to our Gita and Integrated Yoga course. So today we are going to venture into the deeper heart of the Bhagavad Gita. Yesterday we discussed the chapter 9 and we had a small interruption. So we're going to conclude chapter number 9 and mainly focus on chapter number 10, which is the extension of the same theme which Krishna has been talking about the principle of Ananya Bhakti, the principle of exclusive devotion. So let's begin today's session with the invocatory prayers. So joining your palms together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So let's very quickly set up the whiteboard. All right. So we have this last part, a very, very interesting and very important part from our previous chapter, which is the Raja Vidya Rajaguhya Yoga. Right. So from chapter number 9. So if you remember the flow of thought that we had in the first part of this chapter, we discussed the king of this knowledge, which is knowledge about Krishna's Aishwarya Yoga, his mystical opulence, his how he is and he isn't, everything within this creation. And once you understand this mystical greatness of Krishna, all that greatness naturally culminates into wanting to connect with his sweetness. And connecting to his sweetness is at Rajaguhya, which is the most confidential path of the path of devotional service, right? And we Krishna spoke about what are the different ways of approaching him: the misdirected way, the direct way, and the indirect ways. We discussed that yesterday. The Jnana Yoga, Jnana Yagya process, Ekatvas, Pitakvas, and Bahuda Mukhas. So Vishwato Bahuda Mukhas. So we saw about this of these three kinds of indirect approaches. Then even in the direct approach, in the direct personal devotional approach also, one can sometimes misunderstand Krishna and may end up worshipping the Devatas. And Krishna mentioned that is a wrong method, avidhi purvakam, right? And post that Krishna begins, he began his explanation of the direct approach of exclusive pure devotional service. And we saw how it is not the flower, it is not the fruit, it is not the leaf or the water that Krishna is interested in, but that is just the medium to offer our love. And yesterday we discussed how ultimately, if there is anything that the living entity can claim is truly its own, it is its expression of its free will in the form of loving devotional service. And that is what is Krishna wanting from us, right? And in that context, we saw verses like, if we cannot directly follow this highest process of completely, just this offering our pure love, genuine sincere love, at least whatever we do, whatever we eat, whatever offering we may make, we can learn to channelize that in Krishna's service. That was another level we saw in text number 27, right? And then we also saw that how the speciality of this process, that even such a exalted soul who's following this level of yoga, this level of connection with the Lord, sometimes accidentally, even if some if they end up performing some abominable activities, such person are not to be considered impious, or such should not be considered sinful. Why? Because the intention, the purity of their intention still remains the same, their determination still remains the same, and they're going to very soon come back on track, right? And that is where yesterday we discussed, we stopped at how such people, they very quickly are going to get purified and are going to come back to the righteous path, like that. And we also discussed how this is not a license for somebody practicing the process of pure devotional service to be whimsical and to do whatever they want, right? That is not what this particular verse is talking about, but rather sometimes in the course of performing one's constitutional or one's spiritual activities, they may end up compromising on their spiritual, on their material, worldly, conditional activities. And such shortcomings need not be seen as a shortcoming, right? That is the understanding that we got from that verse, right? So continuing with this theme, Krishna now gives a very powerful and a very emphatic statement, right? Because he's going to give a comparative analysis about how this process of devotional service is such a powerful and an empowering process, how there is literally no disqualification for anyone to enter into this process. If you remember, so far we have discussed the process of karma yoga, right? Then we discussed the process of jnana yoga, and we discussed the process of ashtanga yoga or dhyana yoga, right? And the prerequisites for each of these systems of yoga, they have some level of prerequisite. Like for example, for karma yoga, one needs some level of the ability to perform some austerity. For jnana yoga, one needs as a prerequisite some level of intellectual capacity. Right? And then for ashtanga yoga, one needs a very high level of detachment, like detachment from this world, ability to just disconnect from this world, right? And go live in the forest. That kind of an extreme detachment seems like the prerequisite for this ashtanga yoga process, right? And if you look at the Vedic understanding, right? So by default, for when the prerequisite becomes austerity, it automatically disqualifies a person with a tendency of a Shudra, automatically disqualified. What is a Shudra means? A person who is whose psychology is such that they are very much attached to their status quo in life. They don't want to literally come out of their comfort zone. Therefore, austerity is really not the main trait of somebody with that kind of a psychological disposition. That's what a Shudra is. Or somebody who's a Vaishya. Vaishya means one whose mind is so dynamically changing, because they are constantly thinking about prosperity and asset generation, wealth generation. And to be in that kind of a role, one's psychology requires one to be always, thinking very fast, to be in a very highly passionate and a very highly creative and passionate state, right? For such people, it is very difficult for them to sit down, read scriptures, analyze, and enhance their intellectual capacity, right? When I use the word intellectual capacity here, we're not talking about ability to count numbers and count your wealth. We're not talking about that. We're talking about very deep intellectual, analytical, research kind of skills, which is not the core skill of somebody with that kind of a psychological disposition like that of a Vaishya, right? And then there is a third category, because the very nature of Ashtanga practice, where they have to disconnect from this world, go into the forest, live an extremely, intense, it's called tapasya, very, very intense, austere, detached kind of a lifestyle. In the Vedic lifestyle, naturally, many women would not be inspired to take up to this kind of a practice of Ashtanga Yoga. However, the speciality of Bhakti Yoga is that irrespective of whether one is coming with a psychological disposition of a Shudra or a Vaishya, or a physiological orientation of being a woman, none of these are a disqualification. The Bhakti Yoga process is such a holistic and inclusive process that it does not bar anyone from accessing this particular process. And that is what Krishna talks about in text number 32. He says that for one who's taking this process of taking shelter unto me, absorbing in this exclusive devotional service, it does not leave out, while other schools of thought may leave out certain categories of people, but here it does not leave out any of them, right? That is the broadness and the inclusiveness of the Bhakti Yoga process. And if you look at it that way, it also shows indirectly the very strong efficacy of the Bhakti Yoga process, right? Imagine you have two medicines. One medicine says, you have to take this medicine will work only under A, B, C, D, E conditions. You have to take that medicine exactly 24 minutes after food, and you have to take it with water, which is exactly at 32 degrees Celsius, right? And after you take the medicine, you have to do some kind of physical gymnastics, this. There's so many conditions applied for medicine A. And there is medicine B, which says, doesn't matter when you take it, just take it, it's going to work. No prerequisites, no conditions applied, right? So which medicine do you think is more powerful and has greater efficacy, right? Naturally, the one that does not put much conditions. So likewise, that is how Krishna is indirectly, through this verse, indicating the supremacy of this process of devotional service, this exclusive devotional service, right? And then he says, what to speak of then certain other people, like who have a very broad-minded disposition. So a Brahmana means one who's a seeker of truth. Brahma janati the Brahmana. So for one who is that seeker of truth, that lover of truth, then what to speak of such personalities? For them, this process will definitely, like in a rhetoric question, he's asking what to speak of such people, indicating that this process will definitely work for them as well. So that way, he's proving that Bhakti Yoga is such an all-inclusive process. So even the Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas, right? The Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas also. So that way, all the psychological dispositions that you see in the society, they all are included, and they can take benefit of this Bhakti Yoga process, right? And after describing this in text number 33, Krishna gives one of the most important verses of this chapter. What does it really mean? What exactly is this exclusive devotion mean? What is the process that I need to follow? This process of exclusive devotional service, what does it mean? He says, Man manabhava mad bhakto mad yaji mam namaskuru mam eveshyasi yuktvevam atmanam mat parayanaha. Manmana bhava madbhakto. Always think of Krishna. So at a mental level, with your mind, always think of Krishna. Right? And then at the level of your body, namaskuru, offer your homages, offer your obeisances. Bow down, right? Then at the level of your intelligence, right, you should contemplate and worship Krishna. And finally, at the level of your very existence, at the level of your very being, become completely absorbed in Krishna. Right? So this is how, you see, again, the holistic nature of devotional service is brought out. Devotional service in Karma Yoga, one is mainly using one's senses, one's body. And in Jnana Yoga, one is mainly focusing on one's intelligence. In Ashtanga Yoga, one is focusing mainly on controlling the mind. But in Bhakti Yoga process, all our faculties, physical, mental, intellectual, emotional, all of them are engaged in service of the Lord. Right? That's what we see. Mentally think of Krishna. At a body level, Mam Namaskuru, offer your obeisance to Krishna. At an intellectual level, contemplate and understand how do you want to develop your relationship with Krishna. All the Raja Vidya that we studied, the entire Bhagavad Gita for that matter, is such a wonderful experience for the intelligence to sharpen and develop its relationship with Krishna. And finally, at the core of our being, at our very existence, you want to become completely absorbed in thoughts of your Lord. Right? That is how one can actually become, one can practice this process of Ananya Bhakti or exclusive devotional service. And after describing this is how he concludes. And interestingly, this verse, which comes literally almost at the middle of the Bhagavad Gita, is a verse which is going to repeat once again later on in the 18th chapter. So you can see, if Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all instructions, one verse, literally except the last line, literally the first 3 lines are almost the same. So Krishna is going to repeat this verse once more. So understand how important this specific verse of the Bhagavad Gita is, right? So thus Krishna concludes the 9th chapter, and then he begins, even before this time, Arjuna is not going to ask any question, but he continues with the same mood, right? And here he is going to talk about the Vibhuti Yoga. Vibhuti means the mystical powers, the mystical opulence / powers, right? So this is the yoga of connecting to Krishna by understanding his mystical powers, right? So in this particular chapter, Krishna begins, and this is also very, very special, very important chapter, because within this chapter are 4 verses which capture the entire essence of Bhagavad Gita. Literally, if you want to understand the entire Bhagavad Gita in a nutshell, these 4 verses are all that you need to study, and we are going to discuss that in this chapter. So very, very special chapter once again, right? So this chapter begins with the first 7 verses, right, where one is trying to understand Krishna as that highest absolute truth, Param Satyam, or the highest absolute truth, Param Satyam, right? So Krishna continues, look Arjuna, I am going to talk about Bhuya Eva Mahabaho. Again, I am going to talk to you something, right, which is much more deeper than the themes that I have spoken so far. Basically, he's going to repeat that Raja Vidya part once again, because what he has spoken in the Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, even his own, in the 7th chapter, what Krishna spoke about, 7th and 8th chapters of trying to connect to Krishna through intellectual conviction or meditative absorption. This section is much more deeper than that, because this is directly talking about Krishna himself, not a philosophical conception of Krishna, not even correcting to his form as Paramatma, but this is talking about direct Krishna himself, right? And he says, he explains his glories. Actually, this is the best knowledge, right? The best of the knowledge of Krishna is going to be summarized now. Right? And then what does he say? He talks about his own speciality once again. He says, neither the Devatas nor the great sages, they know about my origin. In fact, I am the source of all the Devatas and all the great sages. Right? So this is a very significant verse, because looking at the broader context of the Vedic texts, right? Classically, we understand that Bhagavad Gita itself is part of the Mahabharata, right? But there are the other more conventional, the more classical Vedic texts like the Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Samveda, Atharva Veda. Most of these Vedic texts, they are focusing more on, they specifically do talk about the absolute truth, but along with the absolute truth, they also talk about this creation and how at the time of creation, there were so many devatas or cosmic administrators that were created, and also so many great sages like the Saptarishis and so on. They were also created at the time of creation, who are one of the prominent personalities in this universe. And Krishna is saying, even those prominent personalities of the universe, they do not know my origin. In fact, I am their source. All those devatas and those great sages have come from me, right? Therefore, know that I am the supreme, I am the unborn, I am the original person, right? Knowing Krishna, Krishna says that Krishna is the supreme, original, unborn, right? So like that. So, and therefore, this is a direct expression of Krishna's glory, like that. So then, after having spoken about, he continues, elaborates in the next few verses also. He says that by knowing about this aspect, by knowing about Krishna's greatness, what does it mean? It allows, it facilitates one, or it creates an impetus to one to develop a relationship with Krishna. So all these first 7 verses where Krishna is talking about his glories, it is not some kind of a boastful presentation that, oh, look, I am so great. But rather, it is an indirect calling to each and every one of us that, look, who I am, right? Understand who you are dealing with. Who is this Krishna that you are dealing with? I am not an ordinary person as you think, right? I am that original supreme personality of Godhead, right? And Krishna says in text number 7, that one who is factually convinced of this opulence in mystic power of mind engages in unalloyed devotional service, and of this there is no doubt. So by understanding Krishna's vibhutis, his opulences, what that will create an impetus to engage in unalloyed devotional service. That is the reason why Krishna talks about it. Because many times people, when they read such verses in the Bhagavad Gita, they may get a doubt that why is Krishna being so boastful about himself? It's not about him being boastful. Indirectly, he's trying to inspire all of us, right? And then in the next 4 verses, very, very important verses in text number 8 through 11, Krishna is going to talk about the essence, the entire summary of what he wants to give in the Bhagavad Gita, right? So in fact, these 4 verses are so important. They are called as the Gita in 4 verses. In Sanskritam, it is called as Chatushloki Bhagavad Gita. Chatushloki Bhagavad Gita. Right? So what are these 4 verses? What do they talk about? The first verse says, Aham sarvasya prabhavo. Right? I am the source of everything. Matta sarvam pravartate. Right? Everything emanates from me. Iti matva bhajante mam. One who understands this, they start worshipping me. How? Buddha bhava samanmita, with bhava, with all their hearts, they start worshipping me. So in text number 8, basically Krishna is saying that how Krishna is the source of both material and spiritual worlds. Both material and spiritual worlds, right? And everything ultimately is emanating from him. He is the origin, he is the source, right? It all begins with him, and he is original creator. And by knowing this, this should create an impetus to wanting to develop a relationship, a loving relationship with Krishna. And that desire to develop a relationship with Krishna is, in Sanskritam, it is called as sambandha. Sambandha means a relationship. So by knowing about how Krishna, he is the origin of this material and spiritual worlds, knowing about his great position, his original position, transcendental position, right? It is not just an abstract information, but rather it should create a desire within us that, oh Krishna, really, you are that origin. I would like to know more about you. I'd like to develop a relationship with you, right? But the desire to develop a relationship is one thing, but the desire should be followed by an action to enhance the quality of that relationship, right? That is what it means. Even in our worldly life, you meet a particular person, right? Knowing about the person, initially getting to know that person is one thing, but later on you would like to enhance the quality of your relationship with that person, and that requires some tangible actions, right? And what are those tangible actions? That is so beautifully described in the next verse. So the next verse, Krishna says that Madchitta Madgata Prana Bodhayanta Parasparam Kadhayantascha Mam Nityam Tushyanti cha Ramanti cha. Right? Such people who want to develop a relationship with Krishna, what do? Such pure devotees, their thoughts are always absorbed in Krishna. So such pure devotees are absorbed in Krishna, and consequently what do? Their lives are fully devoted unto me, and they are constantly enlivening and enlightening each other by conversations about me. Basically, they all engage in Krishna Katha, right? And why do they do that? Why do they engage in Katha? Why do they engage in trying to discuss pastimes of Krishna or just discuss about Krishna? Not because they have to, but because they relish doing so. Tushyanticha ramanticha. They completely are they're in a blissful state. They are blissfully relishing discussing topics about Krishna, right? And this is how one enhances one's relationship. Acting in that relationship means that, and that process of studying something, to enhance something, right? That in Sanskritam it is called as abhidheya. Right? So in this in that verse, right? So there one is trying to discuss about Krishna, connect to his sweetness, right? So we'll translate that word abhidheya as actions that enhance the relationship, right? So then, after discussing that, now in the next two verses, in text number 10 and text number 11, Krishna says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogantam yenamam upayantite. So Krishna says, to such people who are completely absorbed about discussing about me, who initially want to develop a relationship with me, and they are enhancing that relationship by talking amongst each other and relishing my Krishna Katha, to such people, Krishna, what does he say? To such people, I give them the understanding, I give them the buddhi. Krishna gives the understanding to come to him, and consequently what happens? To them, Krishna shows that special mercy. He says, Tesham eva anukampartham, anukampa, because of that special mercy, aham ajnanajam tamaha, within our heart, there is this deep darkness, tamaha, which is born out of ajnana, because of ignorance. So what Krishna does, nashayami atma bhavasto jnana deepena bhashvata. So Krishna gives an understanding to come to him. How does he do that? He, with the lamplight of knowledge, with the lamp of knowledge, Krishna destroys the ignorance. Ajnana means ignorance. So Krishna, with that lamp, he destroys that ignorance, and that is how he shows his special mercy. And when that lamplight of knowledge destroys the ignorance, immediately that relationship with Krishna is consummated, right? And that consummation of that relationship is called as prayojana. Right? Prayojan literally means the ultimate conclusion, the consummation of the relationship. Right? And that is how, literally, this is the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. This is why Bhagavad Gita was spoken. Because remember, we discussed this in the first session itself, that ultimately it's a Gita, it's a song. Right? It's a love song Krishna is singing. And in that love song, he's talking about his own glories, his own greatness, not to show off, but to attract our attention, to captivate our attention. Because each and every one of us, we want to develop a relationship with someone or something which is great in this world, right? And knowing our tendency, Krishna therefore is demonstrating his supreme greatness in the Bhagavad Gita and saying, look, you are all your life, you have been trying to establish relationship with tiny, puny greatnesses in this world. But here is the real greatest of the great. Here I am. Now look towards me, establish your relationship with me, right? And once you develop a desire to develop a relationship with Krishna, act on that desire. How do you act on the desire? Come together, with the other pure devotees, right? And by being absorbed in Krishna, discuss my glories, and that way you'll derive great bliss and relishing Krishna Katha. So you see, the process of devotional service is so sweet that even before you attain the perfection itself, even while executing the process itself, one is blissfully relishing the process. And as that continues at the perfectional stage, Krishna personally, as Paramatma in the heart, he is going to destroy all this ignorance, right? So this verse is a very interesting, this 10th and 11th verse is a very interesting verse. We'll actually elaborate that little more, because there's a very interesting word, a very familiar word for all of us in this course, which Krishna uses. I'm going to repeat that this verse again. Let me see if any of you can catch the word which I'm trying to point out. This is text number 10. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam preeti purvakam dadami buddhi yogantam yenamam upayantite. Right? So buddhi yogantam, Remember that word, the whole. So Krishna in text number 10, he again uses the word Buddhi Yoga, right? And if you remember our understanding of this Buddhi Yoga, so far we use this term, right? Karma on the strong platform of jnana, right? Now with this mood and intention of bhakti, and that essence of bhakti we understood across these 4 verses, 8, 9, 10 and 11. In text number 8, what happens? We first want to develop a loving relationship with Krishna. And once you develop that loving relationship with Krishna, we want to act in that relationship. We want to, further proceed that relationship in text number 9. Then, as we continue to act, a stage comes where now we develop that perfection of that relationship. And when that perfection of relationship happens, look, something magical is going to happen now. At this particular stage, this Krishna, who's Paramatma in the heart, also, when he empowers, when he purifies such a personality, such a devotee, and he removes that avidya, the effect of this permeates into every aspect of one's life, right? So that same so-called action, right, one starts wanting to serve Krishna. The same so-called knowledge now is centered around knowing about Krishna. And that same Buddhi Yoga, it completely transforms to the point where this Buddhi Yoga becomes non-different from Bhakti Yoga, right? So this is the whole, in fact, this is, when I said this is the heart of the Bhagavad Gita, right? And this is that grand integration that Krishna has been talking about, right? So if you see Srila Prabhupada, the way he so beautifully brings out this essence, this this conclusion right from the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. If you see throughout the Bhagavad Gita, right, this mood of wanting to directly connect to Krishna is a theme that we see throughout the Bhagavad Gita, right? If you remember, if you go through the different verses of different chapters also, right, we can actually do this very quick analysis. Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, while Krishna has been giving a generic understanding of any specific path, he also has been talking of a very direct personal recommendation to Arjuna. While there is general description, there is also a personal recommendation that he has been giving Arjuna, right? Like for example, in chapter number 2, right? If you see text number 61, right? So Krishna says in text number 61, he says, "Tani sarvani samyamya yukta asita matparaha vashehi yasyendriyani tasya prajna pratishtita." One who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, right? So there he uses the word mat paraha. Mat paraha means me. So Krishna is very directly talking about himself, indicating that in chapter number 2, the goal that I want you to connect to is me. So Krishna is the direct goal. The personal understanding of Krishna is a direct goal. Then if you go to chapter number 3, that famous verse that we discussed, chapter 330, right, which we defined as, this is the definition of karma yoga, right? So what does Krishna says? Mai sarvani karmani sannyasatmat chetasa nirashir nirmamo bhutva yuddhasya vigata jvara. So there again Krishna uses the term mai. Mai sarvani karmani. Mai means unto me, right? Again Krishna is indicating that the goal of karma yoga is also directly me, serve me directly, right? It is at Krishna, right? Then again, if you go into chapter number 4, even there also, we discussed where Krishna is referring to himself in a slightly indirect way in chapter number 4, right? in text number 24, when we discuss the Yajna 2.0 principle, right? There Krishna says, Brahmarpanam, Brahmavir, Brahmagnav. So there, by referring to that word Brahma, he is referring to that his own understanding, that deepest, the highest spiritual understanding, that Brahma is the source of all. When we use the word Brahma, it is not the four-headed Brahma, the creator, but we are talking about that Brahman, that spiritual essence, which is the source of everything. And as we saw just few verses earlier in text number 8, Krishna is saying here, Brahman here means refer to the source of everything. Right? That spiritual source of everything. But we know who is that spiritual source of everything? It is also again Krishna. Right? So again, even in chapter number 4, Krishna gave that personal recommendation to Arjuna that indirectly you have to connect to me, right? And then again in chapter number 5, when we saw that famous verse, the last verse, Bhoktaram Yagatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Surudam Sarvabhutanam Gyatva Mam. Again, Krishna used the word Mam, indicating me, indicating that understand that I am the ultimate benefactor, I am the ultimate enjoyer, I am the ultimate master, the source, and I am also your best friend. Connect unto me. So that is what Krishna says. Again, he's referring to him, very clearly as a personal recommendation to Arjuna. He's saying that, this is what whom you are trying to connect to, right? And then again in chapter number 6, in Ashtanga Yoga, again, in text number 30, Krishna very explicitly says, Yomam pashyati sarvatra mai pashyati, tasyaham na pranashyami, sachame na pranashyati. Such a yogi, such an advanced yogi, after going to the state of trance, going to samadhi, that whole Ashtanga Yoga description that we discussed, then he says, for one who sees me, right? So repeatedly he uses the word, again the word mam, yo mam pashyati, sarvatra mai pashyati, again use the word mai also here. Again indicating that even that goal of that Ashtanga Yoga process also is to perceive that Paramatma, who is Krishna himself, right? So in fact, in the next verse also, Sarva Bhutastam Yo Mam, one who sees me as that super soul in all living entities. In the next verse also use the word Mam, again indirectly saying that the goal of this Ashtanga Yoga process is also me, like that. So if you see, repeatedly, of course, in chapter 7, it is very, very direct and explicit. It is literally talking about himself. But when we saw our evolution of this bhakti, of our Bodhi Yoga definition, when we spoke about karma on the platform of jnana with the mood and intention of bhakti, but actually, even that the ultimate goal of all of this is to establish a direct connection to Krishna. And therefore, Prabhupada very beautifully in this text number 10 purport, he highlights what exactly, how should we understand these different yoga process, karma yoga, jnana yoga, ashtanga yoga, how should we define them? Are they different? So that Prabhupada very nicely he explains in text number 10. So in para number 2, Prabhupada writes like this: when a person knows that what the goal of life is, that is Krishna, but is addicted to the fruits of one's activities, one is acting in karma yoga. So when one knows that my ultimate goal is Krishna, but I want to approach him through my work, such a person is called the karma yogi. When he knows that the goal is Krishna, but takes pleasure in mental speculation to understand Krishna, he is acting in jnana yoga. Again, the goal is very clear. He wants to establish a direct personal relationship with Krishna, but then he is attached to that process of intellectual conviction, mental speculation. So therefore, that process is called jnana yoga. And when he knows the goal and seeks Krishna completely in Krishna consciousness and devotional service, he is acting in Buddhi Yoga or Bhakti Yoga, which is the complete yoga. This complete yoga is the highest perfectional stage of life. So when this Buddhi Yoga, when you understand it in that broader spirit, in its deepest essence, when you understand, actually it is not different from that Bhakti Yoga process itself, right? So this is the confidential understanding that the Bhagavad Gita gives, and not many people can directly understand this. Because of the great acharyas like Srila Prabhupada, they are revealing to us this what this real Buddhi Yoga or Bhakti Yoga is. We are able to see the parallels with them. And now in this, all these verses also, second, third, fourth to sixth chapters, we saw how actually, even though Krishna seemed to be talking about some very, very specific process, but actually Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, ultimately the goal is ultimately about developing that direct personal relationship with Krishna, not some indirect connection, not with his energies, not with anything else of this world, but a direct personal connection with Krishna. And that is a perfection of this Buddhi Yoga process that we have been discussing. And in these 4 verses, Krishna brings out that, and therefore uses the word Dadami Buddhi Yogantam. Oh Arjuna, you remember, I used the process of Buddhi Yoga in the 2nd chapter. This is that Buddhi Yoga. And what does it, when one practices this Buddhi Yoga, what happens? One, Krishna personally removes, right? Krishna personally enters into the heart of such a person and removes that ignorance. And Krishna is not just saying things for the sake of saying. Krishna now is going to walk his talk. And look what happens in the very next verse. As soon as in text number 11, Krishna says, I, and dwelling in your heart, I'm going to enter into your heart, and with the lamplight of knowledge, I'm going to destroy this whole ignorance. Krishna enters into Arjuna's heart and does that. And suddenly Arjuna has his moment of epiphany, right? So at that stage, immediately Arjuna understands, oh my God, Krishna, this is who you really are. I have misunderstood, right? So that is a section. So from text number 12 through 18, we are going to hear Arjuna's realizations. That was Arjuna's moment of epiphany and his realizations. Right? So immediately, look what Arjuna says. He says, oh Krishna, you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ultimate abode, the purest, the absolute truth. You are eternal, transcendental, original person, the unborn, the greatest. Now, Arjuna is not just intellectually repeating these terms. When that avidya, when that ignorance is removed, a spiritual conviction is developed. So all the while, Arjuna was listening to them and learning at an intellectual level. But as soon as Krishna intervened and removed that ignorance, spiritual conviction develops. And that is how we can also develop spiritual conviction, right? So do not take whatever little level of conviction that we all have gathered over the years of our practice. Do not take it for granted. It is a direct blessings of Krishna. Krishna personally is giving us those blessings. So do not undermine whatever level of conviction that we have. And we need to build on that conviction and develop even greater and deeper conviction, right? And then immediately Arjuna, he says, oh Krishna, I totally accept as truth whatever you have told me. In fact, neither the devatas nor the demons can understand your personality. Who are these higher beings who are there? Nobody in this creation can understand your personality. In fact, you alone know yourself by your own internal potency as the Lord of all lords, right? So like that, so Arjuna is fully convinced. So this is not some intellectual repetition, but rather Arjuna is now fully convinced about Krishna's position as that absolute truth, right? That is the Krishna walks his talks and does, he's not just making some false claims like that. So then Arjuna becomes very curious. He says, oh Krishna, you spoke about all these vibhutis, you spoke about your greatness, you spoke about this Raja Vidya, about your Aishwarya Yoga, your mystical opulences. I want to now know more about your opulences. Why? Because I want to feel your presence in every aspect of creation. When one is so madly in love with someone, one wants to exclusively remain connected to that person all the time, whether directly or indirectly. Likewise, Arjuna, like that great devotee, he's madly in love with Krishna, right? Because that is what avidya does. All these words that Arjuna is now speaking are out of it. These are an outpour of his loving devotional expression, right? And he's now so much madly in love with Krishna. He says, Krishna, I want to see you in everything. Tell me, how can I see you in everything? So he says, how shall I constantly think of you? How shall I know you? In what various forms can I remember you, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, O Bhagavan, right? Please describe the details of this mystic power of your opulence. I am never satiated in hearing about you, right? This is what happens, when even in ordinary worldly sense, we can see two lovers, they can sit together and keep talking and talking and talking to each other for unlimitedly long time. They can that. Likewise, of course, there are always limitations in this worldly relationships. But here we're talking about a very, very pure relationship between soul and God. Arjuna representing the soul and Krishna, the Supreme Lord. So at that level, there is never, never, ever a satiation that can ever happen. So then in the next few series of verses, right? So literally from one of the longest sections of Bhagavad Gita, from text number 19 through 42, right? We are going to talk about Krishna's Vibhutis. Vibhuti means his transcendental, mystical opulence. Right? His transcendental, mystical opulence. Right? And there's a big, nice, long description. The essence of this is that how Krishna explains that whatever you see of value, whatever you see that charms your heart, attracts your mind, titillates or impresses your intelligence, not titillates, but impresses your intelligence, there has to be a connection of Krishna in that. There is an element of Krishna-ness in it. And that is why we are attracted. Because ultimately, nothing of this world can actually attract us. Soul and matter are like oil and water. They actually can never mix. There's no relationship at all between them. Only when Krishna, he enters, or when his vibhutis, his mystical opulences are manifested in matter, we all get attracted to it, or the soul gets attracted to it. And therefore, now Krishna is going to list off all the great splendorous things in this creation, right? So he begins by saying, there's a whole list of them. I'm not going to write them down, but please have a look at the whole very beautiful description from the Bhagavad Gita itself. So Krishna begins by saying that how I am the super soul of all living entities. I am the beginning, middle, and the end of all living beings. And he says, among the Adityas, I am Lord Vishnu. So, and then among all the lights, I am the sun. Can you imagine the greatest thing among the form of light in this entire creation is the sun, right? No matter how big, bright, powerful light you may, 100 watt, 1000 watt, however big LED light, filament light, floodlight, whatever light you may have, all of them just fade away in comparison to the sun. So sun is that representation of the greatest opulent form of light, and that opulence is coming from Krishna. So when you look at the sun, and if you're ever amazed by the sun's radiance, just understand it is because of Krishna's touch, that Krishna's Vibhuti, which is there in the sun. Then he says, of the Maruts, I am Marichi. Among the stars, I am the moon. Even the night sky, there are so many stars, right? But then, so stars here basically is referring to those which are glowing in the night time. So among the nighttime luminaries, moon is the brightest among them, because that has a connection of Krishna. like that. Among the Vedas, I am the Samaveda. The Samaveda is so beautiful, melodious, most attractive, and Krishna is most attractive. Therefore, Samaveda has a connection of Krishna. That is why it is very attractive. Among the Devatas, I am Indra. Indra, he is he's a leader, he's a representative, he's a king among all the Devatas. And that kingliness is also Krishna's opulence, like that. And among the senses, I'm the mind, because mind is a central processing unit of all the sensory inputs, right? So therefore, the senses in themselves have a meaning when they are all connected to the mind. So mind is the most important part, and therefore that most important thing is Krishna. Like that among all the living beings, I'm consciousness. Because what is life without consciousness? Among Rudras, I'm Lord Shiva, and so on. He goes on to a whole long list. Among mountains, I'm Meru. Among the generals, I'm Kartikeya. Among waters of body, I'm ocean. Because what can be bigger and more magnificent than the ocean? Like that. And then he says, of the great sages, I'm Bhrigu. Bhrigu is a very, very powerful, empowered sage. Very, very, he in fact, Bhrigu is so powerful. He was selected to test the great lords like Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. Bhrigu had the capacity to go and test Lord Vishnu himself. That is how powerful a sage he was. And then he says, among the vibrations, I'm the transcendental Om, right? Omkara, Pranava, Sarva Vedeshu. Among the chanting process, Yajnanam Japa Yagyosmi, among the different kinds of Yagyas, the most powerful and the most effective Yagya is the Japa process, the chanting process. And Krishna says, I am the chanting process. And then among the immovables, I'm Himalayas. Among the trees, I'm the banyan tree, like that. And he talks about, he gives more such descriptions, right? And then among the demons, I'm Prahlad Maharaj. Who greater a demon, a devotee demon than Prahlad? Among the wielders of weapons, I'm Lord Rama. Among the flowing things, I'm Ganga, because literally Ganga, she's literally all the holy rivers of this world are considered to be an expansion of Ganga Devi herself. So she is the quintessence of all holy rivers, and that is Krishna, like that. And he says, among sciences, I'm the spiritual science of the self. Among the logicians, I'm the conclusive truth. Because the whole point of logic is to arrive at a conclusion, not keep going in infinite speculation. So Krishna is at conclusion. The perfection of logic is in conclusion. And Krishna says, I am that. Right? Among the letters, I'm the sound A. Because there's no, because vowels are there. Even among the vowels, the A vowel is a primary sound. Without that, many other sounds cannot come. So therefore, Krishna says, I am that, like that. And he continues further, that he says, among the months, I am the Margashirsha month, the November, December time. That is the time when, among the seasons, I am the flower-bearing spring. Because spring is the time when all life expands. That's the most beautiful time of the year. So Krishna says, I am that, right? It says, I am also the gambling of the cheats. And I am also the adventure. I am the strength of the strong. Right? Even he says, even among Pandavas, I am Arjuna. So what does that mean now? I mean, Arjuna is standing there and says, I am you. Right? What does it mean? Is it that Krishna and Arjuna are the one and the same? No, it is not in sense of a impersonal monoistic oneness. That is not what Krishna is talking about here. He says, among all the Pandavas, the greatest warrior among them is Arjuna. So that Arjuna's ability to become that greatest warrior is also coming from Krishna. It is Krishna's opulence which is coming there, like that. And so on. He continues, and then he says the last few verses, text number 40, very, very nice verse. Krishna says, "Oh Arjuna, what all this big exhaustive list that I spoke in the last 20 verses or so, right? There is no end." Krishna says, no end to Krishna's opulence, right? What I have spoken to you is a mere indication of my infinite opulences, right? And therefore, in fact, then he continues, very, very important verse, text number 41. He says, Yadyad Vibhuti Matsatvam Srimat Urjitam Evava Tattat Eva Gachatvam Mama tejo amsha sambhavan. Yadyat vibhuti matsatvam. So whatever opulent, anything opulent, Shriya, beautiful and glorious in this creation, it just comes from a spark of Krishna's splendor. Right? So this is a very, very powerful way to really feel connected to Krishna, because sometimes when we interact with this material energy, naturally it is, we get attracted to this material energy. But when we get attracted to material energy, if we can keep our focus intact, that what is attracting me in this material energy is not matter, but it is that Krishna's touch in this matter. Indirectly, I'm not getting attracted to matter, but I'm getting attracted to Krishna. And this is such a beautiful and grounding philosophy of life. It will keep us protected and not get distracted. It will not let our lower nature, our egoistic, selfish nature to take over. Because moment you see anything attractive, the egoistic mind or the egoistic consciousness wants to grab it and enjoy it. But here, when you look at, oh, even this thing is attractive because of its connection to Krishna, it grounds us saying that actually I'm not attracted to matter. Even in my attraction to matter, I'm expressing my attraction to Krishna. Right? So if the creation is so beautiful, how beautiful or how attractive must be the creator? Right? That is the mood a pure devotee has. Therefore, such exalted devotees, they don't get carried away by the false allurements of this material world, but rather, they remain so grounded, and they see that it is ultimately Krishna's presence in everything is what they see. And that's why, in Chaitanya Charitamrita also it is described that such people, such exalted devotees, they do not see static things and moving or immovable things, right? But rather, when they are walking around, it's not they see a mountain, a river, human beings. No, they don't see that. What they see is everywhere they see Krishna, who's their sweetheart, who's the Lord of their heart, right? They see Krishna's presence in everything. They see, oh, this is the spark of Krishna. Oh, this is the manifestation of Krishna's opulence. And that is how they remain eternally connected to Krishna. They are never ever separated from Krishna. This is what it means to be Krishnamayi, right? So we are usually, those of you are familiar with these words, Annamaya, we are Annamayi, Jnanamayi, Manomiyi, Pranamayi, right? Where our consciousness is predominantly dominated at our level of senses. That is called Annamayi consciousness or Annamaya consciousness. If we are dominated more at our emotional level, if our emotions are dominating us, then we are more at the level of Pranamaya. If our mental ideologies are dominating our consciousness, that is Manomaya. If the desire to understand the higher truth of life, if that philosophical bent of mind, if that is our dominant consciousness, that is called Jnanamaya. And beyond that, at the level of the soul you experience, that is called Anandamaya. But this is even beyond that Anandamaya. We are even transcending the soul and connecting to the super soul, to Krishna. That is Krishnamaya or Krishnamayi, right? And that is the consciousness of a pure devotee, an advanced devotee who's practicing this process of Ananya Bhakti, right? And therefore, Krishna ends this particular chapter by saying, what to speak of all these? By my one tiny spark, I'm maintaining this entire creation, right? What is that spark? By Krishna's one fragment, that is a super soul, he is maintaining the entire universe. That is how powerful Krishna's opulence is, like that. So by describing this, so this is a very, very powerful chapter that will open up our whole very approach to how we look at matter, right? Because conventionally one may see matter as an obstacle, matter as a distraction. But when you see everything's connection, that sambandha with Krishna, then that very matter which earlier was a distraction will now become an aid for you in your connection to Krishna and your remembrance to Krishna, right? And this is the very powerful grounding philosophy that Krishna gives, right, in this particular chapter. So with this, we'll end our discussion today. I'll very quickly summarize what we discussed today, and then we can open the forum for questions. So we began where we left off yesterday in Rajavidya Rajaguhya Yoga, and Krishna very emphatically is opening the doors of Bhakti Yoga, this Ananya Bhakti, to anyone. There are no disqualifications. Whatever your physiological or psychological type is, everybody can practice this Bhakti Yoga. And what does it mean to practice this devotional service, exclusive devotional service? At the level of your body, offer your respects to Krishna. At the level of your mind, think about Krishna. At the level of your intelligence, contemplate and worship Krishna. And at the level of your very existence, completely absorb in Krishna. Right? That is a very, very powerful verse with which Krishna ends the 9th chapter. And after that, we began the 10th chapter, Vibhuti Yoga. And this Vibhuti Yoga, Krishna initially first describes his own glories, not with a sense of self-aggrandizement, but rather he's trying to attract our attention, which is so distracted with the other false attractions of this world. We are always trying to connect to some greatness in this world, but here is Krishna talking about the supreme greatness of himself. And therefore, this is the best of the spiritual knowledge. By knowing Krishna as that supreme, original, unborn person, we'll start developing and understanding his Krishna's Vibhutis, his opulences. One will develop an attraction to engage in devotional service. And in 4 verses 8, 9, 10, 11, Krishna summarizes the entire process of Bhagavad Gita, the entire process of Gita spirituality. He summarizes the entire integrated yoga that Gita is talking about. What is it? In text number 8, understand Krishna is the source of everything, both material and spiritual worlds. And that should inspire us to develop a loving relationship with him, the sambandha. And what do I do once I develop the relationship? I enhance that relationship by engaging in Krishna Katha, constantly discussing about Krishna in the association of other lovers of Krishna, other devotees of Krishna, and blissfully relishing that process. And what happens if I continue doing that? In the next 2 verses, Krishna says, Krishna personally gives them the understanding, and with the lamplight of knowledge, he destroys that ignorance within the heart. And that is the ultimate goal, where that natural attraction to Krishna comes, not only self-realization happening, but even God realization happening at that particular stage, right? And then we had a detailed analysis on that word Bodhi Yoga, the significance of that word, how Prabhupada also points out that Bodhi Yoga and Bhakti Yoga are actually non-different, right? It is not that a Karma Yoga or a Jnana Yoga, it is not that the Bhagavad Gita is not talking about different paths with different goals, right? This is the biggest misconception, how people are being misled by reading different versions of Bhagavad Gita. There is only one process in the Bhagavad Gita, that is the Buddhi Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. There is only one goal of Bhagavad Gita, that is developing a personal relationship with Krishna. Each and every one of us, we may have a slightly different approach. If one is more work-centric approach, action-centric approach, that is Karma Yoga. If one is more intellectual-centric approach, that is Jnana Yoga. If more heart-centric approach, that is Bhakti Yoga. But ultimately, the very word yoga, when you use the word yoga, means to connect to Krishna, right? That is the essence. That is the deepest meaning of the word yoga according to Bhagavad Gita, right? And we saw how ultimately all these chapters are finally talking about it, one same process. And then we saw Arjuna's realizations. Krishna was not just shooting in the air some blank statements, but he walked his talk. As soon as he said that I enter into the heart of such devotees and purify them, remove their ignorance, Krishna did that to Arjuna. And immediately Arjuna, he had his moment of realization. And he became fully convinced of Krishna's position as the absolute truth, right? And then he asked Krishna, now I want to constantly remember you. I want to be constantly meditating upon you, thinking of you. How do I do that? right? Show me, describe your opulence. And Krishna goes into a long, detailed explanation. And the essence of all of that is that how anything splendorous, anything opulent, anything beautiful in this creation, it has to have a spark of Krishna. Or in other terms, ultimately, we all are actually looking for Krishna, and we all are actually attracted to Krishna. Just the names and the forms and the shapes within this world may keep changing, but ultimately, that which is satisfying the heart, that which is satisfying the soul, is Krishna. And when we internalize this chapter, we will not get enamored by these external shapes and forms and of this world, and go past our layer of the false ego, the enjoyment tendency of the false ego, and learn to respect things, see things for what they are, for their true relationship to Krishna, and get attracted to that Krishna-ness in things, right? This is the attitude of a pure devotee. In this Bhakti Yoga process or Buddhi Yoga process, one does not reject the world saying this world is Maya, this world is an illusion, this world is a distraction. No, one embraces this world because of its connection to Krishna, because such a devotee sees Krishna in everything. And that Krishna Mai, that is what we discussed, right? That is the perfection of Krishna consciousness. And Krishna says, all these opulences that I spoke about, there's no end to my opulences. What to speak of all of this? By my one insignificant fragment as super soul, I'm maintaining the entire universe. Then what do how much will you try to understand my complete opulence? It's impossible to understand. So saying this, Krishna ends the specific chapter, right? So let's now open the forum for any questions or comments that we may have. All right. So I see a question from Gail. Can you unmute yourself, Gail?
Yes, Hare Krishna Prabhu. Oh my God, millions of questions. Yeah, so, oh my God, where to start? Well, one thing is, that verse 934, where you're making the distinctions between the paying your obeisances, worshiping, thinking of Krishna, like that, right? And so still, there are some that really sound very similar, because for one thing, for all of them, our mind is supposed to be engaged. So for something like worshiping Krishna, you said that involves contemplation, but so does thinking of Krishna involves worshiping. And also worshiping Krishna, it involves using the body to use the various paraphernalia to worship Krishna, and paying your obeisances, that also uses the body. So there seems to be at least overlap. There doesn't seem to be a clear distinction in what parts of the body, a person uses in those.
Right.
So I don't know if you could tease them apart a little bit more for me.
Okay. So yeah, even though we gave a very, like a classified them into different categories, but even right now, even for me to function, I have to think, I have to articulate, I have to use my vocal cords and present it. And from mind to senses, in between there's a prana that I have to activate. So you see, for me to function in this world, I need to use all my faculties. But I gave that specific classification, or Krishna also talks about specific distinction there, just to say that predominantly in offering obeisances, it's mostly the body which you see acting.
Yes.
In the process of contemplation, mostly it is the intelligence which you see working. In the process of thinking, mostly it is a mind which is involved. So that way, it's a more you can say, think of it like a more artistic way of presenting. Use all your faculties of your existence in my connection. So that way, Krishna is making that appeal there.
Yeah, actually, I get your point. But between using the mind, right, and using the intelligence in worshiping, what is really the distinction there, in terms of predominance? I'm not understanding.
Right. So yeah, so I use the word contemplate and worship for intelligence, right? Right.
Yeah.
So whereas there's a difference between thinking and contemplation. So what the mind does, Mind has its functions of thinking, desiring, feeling. These are the things that happen at the mental level. But at the intellectual level, one develops the ability to discriminate, right? That discrimination between what is right and what is wrong, right? So like, for example, in this particular chapter, we saw in the 10th chapter, we saw that how ultimately anything that is opulent has to have the connection of Krishna. So when you see something splendorous in this world, the intelligence immediately kicks in and it starts to contemplate, oh, what is that Krishna-ness in this which is attracting to me, right? One starts to see that way. So that way, so that is where intelligence. So you see how you're not just thinking about Krishna, you're contemplating about that Krishna-ness in something like that. So that is a very subtle difference there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a subtle difference. Okay. Also, these two terms, Bhakti Yoga and Bodhi Yoga, they do seem to be so synonymous. So why is there this distinction ever being made at all?
Okay. Nice question. Okay. Now, actually, this is a good point of our course to discuss this answer. So actually, if you see throughout the Bhagavad Gita, whenever you read Prabhupada's explanation, he would always use the word Buddhi Yoga, Bhakti Yoga very synonymously. Now, when Arjuna, when he raised his arguments, when Krishna sensed in Arjuna an inhibition to fight because he was very much influenced by the jnana process, right? Remember the word jnana, not our jnana of knowledge of work, or not even jnana or knowledge of Krishna. We're talking about that in second chapter, the first part of second chapter, we discussed that body was a soul philosophy. That is the raw jnana that we spoke about. So because Arjuna was thinking like a jnani, so Krishna wanted to attract Arjuna's attention. Oh, you like to use your intelligence, you like to think of yourself as a jnani, and a jnani uses their buddhi. The Sanskritam word for intelligence is buddhi. Oh, you try to be a jnani and you want to use your buddhi to get connected to me. Therefore, he uses the word Buddhi Yoga. Actually, if I may use this expression, Buddhi Yoga is a branding that Krishna gave to Bhakti Yoga, because if you see the classical Vedic texts, nowhere will you find this word called as Buddhi Yoga. There is Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Dhyana or Ashtanga Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. These terms are popular. But the word Buddhi Yoga is very, very unique to the Bhagavad Gita, because Krishna is trying to, attract Arjuna's attention. Oh, you want to be a jnani, you want to use your buddhi, you want to use your intelligence. Here is the intellectual yoga, the Buddhi Yoga process. But indirectly, he's giving him Bhakti Yoga only, the integrated yoga, like that. Yeah.
Okay. Also, if I can, this when you were discussing the qualifications of a karma yogi, jnana yogi, and the yogi, Ashtanga yogi, these qualifications, I found them a little confusing, because it seemed like, for one thing, austerities are required for all three, detachment is required for all three, and so again, I wasn't, for example, to progress from karma yoga to jnana yoga, you have to become, detached, and jnana yoga to Ashtanga yoga also. So, and like I said, these qualifications seem to be common to all three. So I wasn't really getting in the difference in the qualifications for them.
Right. So predominantly in the Karma Yoga process, it involves following a very strong, disciplined approach to life. And having that disciplined approach is itself a kind of an austerity. And when we spoke about how somebody with that kind of a status quo mentality, a Shudra mentality, such a person following a very disciplined approach to life may not be possible. So that there itself, there is a prerequisite for Karma Yoga. And as you rightly said, when one follows a disciplined Karma Yoga process, it leads to a certain level of detachment, and that becomes the prerequisite now for Jnana Yoga, right? And then for that Ashtanga Yoga to further manifest, so from Jnani, after by practicing all that intellectual understanding, one starts to go from intellectual speculation to meditative contemplation. So the Jnani starts progressing towards the Dhyan stage. And for that to happen, for Dhyan to happen, a yogi tries to minimize all the external disturbances. So one lives in the forest, disconnects completely from this world. We saw in the 6th chapter also, he goes to a forest, sits on a seat, not too high, not too low, eyes half closed. The whole description we discussed Ashtanga Yoga, and which requires going through a lot of hardships and living in a completely disconnected way. So these are the classical prerequisites. Today, when you talk about Ashtanga Yoga, nobody talks about this. The true classical definition of Ashtanga Yoga requires one to actually go to a forest and practice it there. At least the deeper, the Antaranga Yoga. The external limbs, one can still engage while still being in the society. But some of the deeper limbs like Dhyan, Dharana and Samadhi, for a yogi to attain perfection in that, they cannot sit in a crowded Mumbai or New York street and perform their their meditation like that. So that way we connected those 3 prerequisites there, the qualifications.
Yeah. The detachment of a Jnana yogi, how was it different from the detachment of this Ashtanga yogi?
So an Ashtanga yogi goes even past the detachment so for a Jnana yogi, the detachment is more in terms of, say, little trivial material allurements. But here, an Ashtanga yogi's detachment is complete disconnection from this world.
Okay.
From the worldliness, and the world itself goes somewhere deep into a cave and goes there. That is a level of intense detachment that an Ashtanga yogi has to demonstrate. Okay,
Prabhu, just bear with me. Just 1-2 more questions, just very quickly.
Okay.
When you were discussing Krishna is not to boast. He by proclaiming his grace, I feel that for some people it wouldn't necessarily inspire devotion. It might inspire envy. I'm thinking of the example of Shukracharya, right? He knew very well, Krishna's greatness, yet that did not inspire devotion in him. So, I'm just questioning the strategy.
So if you remember, therefore, this process of pure devotional service is not for those who are envious. If you go back to the beginning of chapter number 9 itself, Krishna says, Idam tute guhyatamam pravakshami anusuyave. In 9.1, Krishna says, my dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart this most confidential knowledge to you. So this whole section, 9th and 10th chapters, is not for those who are envious. So that is yes. So right in the beginning, Krishna made it clear.
Okay, so if you are a person who is not envious by nature, then the proclamation of these glories should attract you to him.
Yes, exactly, correct.
These this hierarchy of absorptions, how you say Anandmayi? If you could just give me the Sanskrit again, Anandmayi for the
yes. So it's Annamaya or Annamayi. Anna, A-N-N-A. Anna means food, literally. I am my food, I am my body, I am my senses. That is where one derives one sense of being at the level of senses or the body. That is Annamaya. The word that is used is Kosha. Kosha means a covering of consciousness, right? This is the food layer, food sheath, if you may say. Then the next layer is called Pranamaya. Prana means, your life air, which is very strongly connected to your emotional layer, that is the second layer. And the more deeper layer is called Manomaya, mind, Manomaya layer. Then the fourth layer is called...
Pranamaya was the mind, right?
Pranamaya is at the level of emotions.
Oh, that's different from the mind?
That is different from the mind. So there is a slight difference between thoughts and feelings. emotions and feelings.
No, emotions and thoughts. No?
As well, right? But emotions, thoughts, and feelings, all three are actually different. Of course, this is a topic which may go a little deeper, but I'll give a very simple example. Emotions are actually the link between the body and the mind. Like anger is an emotion born out of a feeling of, say, resentment, right?
Yes.
So like that. So the prana basically is like the link between the mind and the body.
Okay.
Right. So that pranic layer, at that layer also is where we experience our emotions. So I'm actually typing it in our chat box also as we speak. So
that'd be great.
So we can actually get the exact.
Yeah, and then if you could distinguish between emotions and feelings.
Yeah. So very quickly, emotions, literally even the Greek word emotions comes from the word mover, which means that something that is moving outwards. So what is moving outwards? Like the Vedic science explains that the body, the physical body, the senses, and the mind are linked through the pranavayus, or the pranas, right? And when you think of something, right, or let's take the example of anger only that we just discussed, right? So when you hear a very sad news or very disturbing news, that particular feeling of sadness suddenly you start manifesting some physiological changes in the form of tears. Maybe your face will become very red hot, or maybe you may even, if it's very terrifying thing, you may start even shivering. So how does this exactly happen? It is that prana which is making these changes. So emotions are when we talk about those things, tears, anger, redness of your face, those are all emotional manifestations. Emotions are more physiological, right? Whereas feelings are more psychological.
Okay, so therefore, let me see. Let me just quickly write. Feelings, psychological, and emotions are more on the physical.
Right.
And so pranamaya was emotions.
Right.
And feelings, pranamaya was emotions. Feelings, does that have a separate category? So
the thoughts, feelings, desires, we'll club them all together at the level of the mind.
Okay, that's manomaya.
So I just posted it in the chat box. You can have a look at it. Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess you put intellect there.
Yes.
Intelligence. Vijnanamaya. And Anandamaya is the soul, and then Krishnamaya, of course.
Yes.
So at the level of the soul, a person is not necessarily so much aware of Krishna. Maybe they're more aware of their self as spirit separate from the body only.
Well, it is. I specifically use the word Krishnamaya in the context of. So you can say Krishnamaya is almost similar to Anandamaya, but little more than that. Because one can also develop this is a very, very deep loving relationship with Krishna, right? That is what we are referring to by the Krishnamaya state.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. And just one last thing is when you were saying that a person who is more inclined on a body level, they engage in karma yoga, intellectual level, jnana yoga, so on.
Right.
What are the technical term for those things? Be karma mishra bhakti, jnana mishra bhakti?
Right. So yeah, so Prabhupada, he simplifies our life by not going into too many technical complications, right? But so these terms that you are quoting are sometimes our acharyas also they quote. What it means is basically, it is bhakti, but one has an inclination of karma or of work oriented, action oriented, right? Or it is still bhakti where one is more knowledge oriented, or one is bhakti but it is yoga oriented. Like the 7th chapter, our acharyas like to call it as, this is a Jnana Mishra Bhakti. It is Bhakti, you're trying to connect to Krishna, but it's a very intellectual conviction, right? So it is a Jnana based. Whereas in the 8th chapter, we saw it is more of a meditative absorption. We saw about the Ashtanga Yoga, the Shat Chakra Yoga, how the yogi leaves his body by meditating on Om and focusing his consciousness in the middle of his eyebrows, that whole yogic way of meditating. That is a Yoga Mishra Bhakti. So our acharyas like to, because our, especially in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, we like to be very, very categorical, right? So we want to very clearly distinguish the pure bhakti, the Ananya Bhakti, the highest, the purest form of bhakti from slightly tinged bhaktis. So therefore, our acharyas use these terminologies, right? But Prabhupada makes our life very easy, because from Prabhupada's perspective, somehow or the other, you are connecting to Krishna. That is enough. Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. Of course, he always very categorically emphasized Bhakti Yoga as the most direct connection and the most effective connection. But he is also very generous in including all the other kind of practitioners also within that same category, like that.
Okay, Prabhu. Boy, you've been so patient. Thank you so much. Listen, this was the second class of this weekend, or the third? Because
this is the third. This is the third one. This
is the third. Okay. So I'm waiting for the recordings. I don't
that
see
should
the
be uploaded soon. Yeah, yesterday's recording uploaded. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hare Krishna. Vanishji, would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. I don't have any words other than just saying thank you. Please accept my gratitude for the beautiful, simplistic way of explaining things to us. Otherwise, people like us, how will we even understand such kind of divine knowledge here? So thank you so much. I have two questions, Prabhuji. Of course, I mean, I'm not so intelligent enough to understand even the simple thing that you explained to me. Please excuse me over there. The verse you spoke about yesterday, is it okay I take up the question relating to yesterday chapter, Prabhu?
Sure.
Yesterday, you spoke about 9.15, wherein you spoke about Ekatvena, Prutatvena, Bahuda Vishwato Mukham.
Right.
You did explain the various types of devotees and their forms of worship.
Right.
Honestly, I didn't get it, Prabhu. While I understood the first one, where you talk about Mayavadis worshipping the impersonal feature, that was very clear. But Ekatvena, Prutatvena, even Bahuda Vishwatomukam, that also I understood, Prabhu.
Right.
Ekatvena, Prutatvena. Honestly, I was not able to make out. You spoke about they worship on concocted forms. Right. So to make my life simpler in understanding what is that you meant, though I should not be I should not worry much about it, but it is basically to understand, that's it. What is that they do, right? From that perspective, I want to understand what did you mean by concocted forms, and the other one, oneness with something you wrote, Prabhu. I'm sorry, I'm missing on that piece. So please help me on that thing, number one. Number two, 9.32, Prabhu. It talks about Striyo Vaishyas Tata Shudras Tepi Param Gatim. I understand that the Varnas are based on the, of course, a tinge of the gunas and the quality of the work. Perfect. And that's how the lower modes of natures, which the Shudras and Vaishyas they acquire, very difficult for them to kind of, get to that state of whatever mind. So that's how it takes, I understand from the guna perspective. But here there is a reference of women, Striyo. I come from that thing. Probably I wanted to be more clear.
Right.
Where is this women coming from, and what is that explanation you gave today? Because I was completely clueless about it, Prabhu.
Okay.
Sorry for asking this thing again.
Okay. Sure. So
Thank you,
take
Prabhu.
up Hare Krishna. So let's take up the first question. So when in that Jnani Yajnana Chapyanye, when Krishna talks about that, so we have to understand within the broadness of the world cultures also, if you see that at one level, the moment one tries to understand that there is someone or something higher than me, they are trying to connect to Krishna, right? Now, in that connection, like here we are very clear, okay, here is Krishna, the Supreme Lord, he is the source of all material and spiritual worlds, we understood that. But sometimes one may try to indirectly connect to Krishna by saying that, look, ultimately that element of life, that principle of life has to come from the Creator, from that whoever that Supreme Lord is. And that lifeness, that principle of life has to have a connection with that Creator, to the point where one may even see that life itself, or the Creator itself, is that life element, right? And this is not a very concocted philosophy, but rather if you read certain sections of the Upanishads also, it talks about how there is something called as Mukhya Prana within this body, and until that Mukhya Prana enters into that body, the life activity within this body does not start. And that Mukhya Prana is actually the Lord himself. This is how one of the Upanishads explains this. So one may therefore see that even though there is a soul and super soul, one does not see the distinction, but rather one sees that, because even that soul also is indirectly empowered by the super soul. Remember, I yesterday spoke about the sunlight and the sun's light. I gave the example of moon and sun, right? So even that moonlight is also indirectly sunlight. So therefore, from at one level, one may say there is no difference between moonlight and sun. Therefore, moon and sun are the same. One may very extend that logic, though it is improper, but still that is why we are calling it as an indirect worship. One may extend that logic and may say even that soul's consciousness is also coming from Lord. Therefore, indirectly, I am that Lord. That lifeness within me, that life within me is also the Supreme Lord. And one may misunderstand oneself as a Lord and may worship, that ahangro pasakas, one may worship oneself as a Lord. So that is the kind of understanding that Krishna is talking about. So is Krishna justifying that kind of a form of worship by indirectly calling, by very explicitly calling it as an indirect worship? Krishna is saying that this is not the direct way of approaching me, right? But still, there is a category of worship. Of course, you don't see them so often today. And this is not to be misunderstood with the Mayavadi understanding. In Mayavad understanding, they clearly deny the form of the Lord. That is the main important, the defining characteristic of a Mayavad philosophy, means that they consider the world as an illusion and they consider the Lord's form as an illusion. And they also have this understanding of oneness with the Jiva and Ishvara also, right? So that is a similarity. But here the Ekatvas, one should not misunderstand to be as the Mayavadis, like that. So that is one important distinction. And likewise, the concocted forms, Ekatvena, Prithakvena. What does concocted form means? Again, one may have again an understanding that there is someone again beyond me, and I need to externalize that someone or something and I need something to worship. Because for any worship process to happen, there has to be the worshipper, the process of worship, and the worshipped itself. Without that, there is no external worship possible. So, but then because one lacks that right understanding, one lacks that Vedic understanding, scriptural understanding, one may create any form, right? Especially you see that a lot happening in modern Hinduism, right? One may create any particular form and may start worshipping, right? So indirectly, and what are the forms that they create? Something of magnificence, something that inspires awe and reverence in them. So anything that is inspiring awe and reverence has to have that Krishna connection, as we saw in today's chapter as well, right? So that way, one creates various concocted forms just to externalize an object of worship, right? And why Prabhupada specifically uses the term concocted forms for this Prithakvas, indicating that these are not direct forms of the Lord. And if you remember yesterday during the discussion also I mentioned, this Prithakvas or externalized forms of worship is not to be misunderstood with the concept of deity worship. Because deity worship, we are worshipping the bona fide forms of the Lord, as mentioned in scriptures. And we elaborated a lot in the first session how the deity is non-different from the Lord. It is just a matter of time and our consciousness which is separating our understanding, right? So that is understanding of ekatvas and prithakvas, right? So that is the understanding. And Vishwata Bahudamukam, you said, it's you have understood, right? So then, okay, I see you raised your hand. Is there something you want to get clarified with respect to this answer?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah.
I understood what you spoke about, ekatvas and prithakvas.
Mhm.
Now, and these are indirect form of worship.
Mhm.
And since Krishna himself was spoken about it, there is some, what do you call, way of success or progress that the devotees can make in some time, some due course of time. Is it right, Prabhu?
Yes,
Eh,
yes, yes.
we
So what
had-
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. In third chapter, Karma Yoga,
Mhm.
you spoke about the sacrifice, cycle of sacrifice.
Mhm.
And Krishna himself, at the time of creation of the material universe, he also sends the yajna, the sacrifice, the way the sacrifices have to be conducted, etc., etc.
Mhm.
And he also mentions that he is the yajna, also yajna purusha. That's also we understand.
Right.
Now, this, I suppose, this entire cycle of sacrifice is basically for the so-called karma kandis who are looking for some kind of material benedictions. Correct me if my understanding wrong, Prabhu.
Not all of them, because the concept of yajna or connecting to yajna purusha also is a very powerful spiritual process. We are directly worshipping Lord Vishnu as yajna purusha. So one can also ask for material benedictions from the Lord, but the process in itself is a very spiritual process also.
Oh, excellent. So this comes under the form of direct worship, is it? Not indirect, though they might be.
No, yes, definitely. It's Yajna Purusha. It is direct Krishna coming in the form of course, in this specific chapter, we reserve the term direct worship to exclusive loving devotional service to the personal form of the Lord, because in Yajna Purusha form, I may not see, I cannot dress the Yajna Purusha. I cannot even touch him. Where the question of rendering personal service to him, right? So in this specific chapter, we reserve the term Ananya Bhakti exclusively to the direct personal form of the Lord. Like that.
Okay? Got it. Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah. Okay. So then, regarding your next question, in today's discussion, we elaborated these two verses. Krishna specifically talks to demonstrate the efficacy of the process of devotional service, how certain other processes of spiritual progress may straightaway become like a disqualification for different people. Like in response to the previous question also, we discussed how the process of karma yoga in itself requires following some discipline, and that kind of a disciplined orientation by default is not possible for somebody who has this kind of a psychological disposition where they are only attached to a particular form of life. I like to define the Shudra mentality as attached to a status quo. Right? They don't want any disturbances. They're looking for peace in life. And such people like to be in a certain kind of a comfort zone. Right? As you can see, a lot of people all around us, even ourselves included, right? We always like to live in a particular comfort zone. That is a Shudra mentality. For such people, Karma Yoga process itself becomes they are disqualified for that. Likewise, for a Vaishya whose mind is so agitated, always thinking, he has high level of rajas. For such a person, sitting down peacefully and reading scriptures, it becomes a disqualification. And likewise, from the traditional classical social setup, where women were more in, they were not exposed to too much of physical hardships, and the society would not allow women to actually, venture on their own in going into the forests and, living on their own in that kind of a social construct, social setup, right? The process of Ashtanga Yoga by default becomes impossible for a woman to ever take up to. Whereas in this, Krishna, he mentions these three specifically in that context. And therefore he says, look, in Bhakti Yoga process, we don't have such kind of limitations. Therefore, it doesn't matter, your physiological or psychological disposition just does not in any way hinder. Or in other words, you can say that in the university of bhakti, there is no entrance exam, there is no qualifications. Anybody can enter. Of course, to graduate, you still have to work hard, right? That effort one still has to put, like that. So in that context, the specific verse has been spoken. All right. Okay, so thank you. Hope that clarifies. All right. So let's end our discussion today. We again overshot our time, but I hope I covered up for our yesterday's abrupt interruption due to some technical failure. So we just breezed past the heart of the Bhagavad Gita. In the next chapter, in the next weekend, we are going to discuss chapters 11, 12, and 13. Again, chapter 12 itself is again called as Bhakti Yoga. Again, very, very powerful chapter coming up. And chapter 11 also is a very, very famous chapter, Krishna revealing his universal form. So we'll go into those discussions in our next weekend's class. All right, so let's conclude with our closing prayers. Joining your palms together. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunattu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you all very much. So see you in the next session in the next weekend. Hare Krishna.